So what we're going to have a look at in this video is the structure of the Earth, and in particular we're going to have a little bit of a look at the crust in more detail. So just a quick reminder, the Earth is structured so that it is more dense in the centre and it becomes less dense as we move away from the centre up towards the surface of the Earth. Okay. The inner core is incredibly dense, it's solid. The outer core is made of the same materials as the inner core, which is iron and nickel, but it is actually liquid. And above the core, we've got this area called the mantle, which is, people describe it as being a fluid rock. That kind of gives the impression that it's all sort of like molten lava in there. That's not the case, but it is rock that is just hot and plastic enough, which is a term that we use to describe something that can just change shape or move ever so slightly. So it does have some movement in there, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail over the next few lessons. Above the mantle is the part that we are familiar with, which is the crust of the Earth. It's incredibly thin compared to the rest of the Earth. So you can think of it as being the equivalent thickness of the skin on an apple. The skin compared to the whole apple, that's the crust compared to the whole Earth. Okay, and it's the crust that we want to have a look at in a little bit more detail now. So we're just going to zoom in on that crust and have a look at what it looks like. The first thing you need to understand about the crust is that it actually sits below both the ocean and also the land. So that's going to go under the ocean. We'll do a little mountain range here for the land. And it's thicker under the land. Say this is under a continent, this is under the ocean. It's thinner under the ocean, much thicker under the continents. I'm going to draw in a little ocean here. So the ocean sits above the crust, like that. Okay, so the part above the continents we refer to as continental crust. And its features are that it is thick and it's also less dense than the oceanic crust. Okay? The oceanic crust, which is this bit, is the stuff that sits underneath the water, oceanic crust, and that is thin and it is denser. And when I'm talking about the densities, I'm talking about comparative densities. This crust here is more dense than this crust here. Okay, so that is the structure of the crust in really basic terms. I'm going to add a little bit of detail here. If you do not like this detail, then you don't need to worry about it too much. But I've spoken to you before about what we refer to as the lithosphere. So the crust is basically the Year 9 version of what we would call the lithosphere. All the rocks and soils and sands and everything sitting on the surface of the Earth. Technically speaking though, the lithosphere also includes a thin layer here, which is hard, solid material, and it is just the very top layer of the mantle that's kind of stuck to the bottom of the crust. So we would say that is solid top of mantle. Okay, so that, just going to put in a little label here. That is the lithosphere. Those two components all together. Okay, in fact, that should extend to show the whole continental crust there. Okay, underneath that, we've got the mantle. This is not to scale, but you can imagine that this is the upper mantle, here, and beneath that is the lower mantle that we talked about over in our diagram here. And way down beneath all that stuff, we can just mark the core in here. Now, there's another term, if you like these terms, that I'm going to introduce you to. Again, you don't really need to know this, definitely not for year 9, but just in case you're interested. The very top of the upper mantle has this section in it that goes like this, right the way through here. That is a little bit more slippery and moves a little bit more easily than the rest of the upper mantle. And we refer to it as the asthenosphere. Okay, and you can think of it as being like the slippery layer that just sits underneath that solid part that's going to allow the crust to move around. And we've already introduced the idea that continents can move, so obviously there must be something going on in the crust that allows some kind of movement to happen. So that is the slippery upper, I'm going to say upper mantle, sitting underneath our lithosphere there. Okay, so that's a quick introduction to the structure of the crust. The most important part is that you know that the continental crust is thick and less dense, that the crust extends all the way under all the oceans, and underneath those oceans it is thinner and more dense. If you're interested in learning more terms than that, the lithosphere technically includes this thin, solid top of the mantle, and the asthenosphere is this very slippery little layer at the upper mantle that allows a bit of movement of those crust, which is the tectonic plates, sitting on top of it.